How do you keep scaling a portfolio with interest rates this high? What options do wealthy investors have that you might not know about?
Here, go buy yourself some more money.
Going through the journey of analysing 4,000 portfolios, how are they actually doing it? I found out 5 key ways.
We speak with Jordan De Jong, founder of Gameplans, a portfolio analytics tool everyday investors are using to scale their property portfolios. We're going to talk with him about the more common trends he sees that are helping people continue to grow their portfolios.
Number 1, potentially build up a separate type of entity, which could be a company or a trust. Every time a broker says no, go and talk to 3 more.
As well as some of the options he's seeing the bigger investors take.
How are they possibly getting 20, 30, 200 properties? How are they able to do this? What we typically find here is something called a lease stock loan. And a really key point on that is don't dive.
If you're interested in growing your property portfolio in 2024 and beyond, this is an episode you're going to want to listen to close. My name's Todd Sloan. This is the Pizza and Property Podcast, and you're about to listen to my chat with Jordan De Jong. Maxing out borrowing capacity. It's a big problem for some people. Jordan, you want to talk about it?
I do. It's actually one of my favorite topics because it comes up so often.
And it's too common. And I think, honestly, my view on it, I'm really excited to unpack yours with the data that you see in the back end from Gameplans. But I think a lot of it's just got to do with people just kind of buying with their hearts, not their heads, getting yields that don't really help, maybe properties that don't match their incomes. But this is just my sort of like anecdotal evidence on it. What does the data actually say? You got 5 kind of different steps that we can kind of break it down into to really look at how do we not max ourselves out and how do we keep building the portfolio?
100%. Well, there's 2 things that we really commonly see. So if you take an average household income of around 200K, let's just say, generally you can borrow about 6 times your income. At the moment, it's probably about 5 times your income, but generally over like a long period of time, it's about 6 times your income. So if you just run the maths, household can generally borrow about $1.2 million. So we see 2 things. It's either like the family home that someone's purchased at about 1.3, 1.4, it's quite expensive, but they've utilized their entire borrowing capacity in doing so, and they feel stuck. The second one that we commonly see is like a property investor who has started when they were younger. They've built a portfolio of 2 or 3 properties. They've bought 3 at 500K. Now they've got $1.2 million worth of debt and they're stuck. And that's what kind of happened to me. And I used to listen to all the mentors, all the big property investors that are out there that come on podcasts like this and be like, how are they possibly getting 20, 30, 200 properties? Like, how are they able to do this? And so going through the journey of like analyzing 4,000 portfolios, I'm like, well, how are they actually doing it? And I've found out like 5 key ways that you can do it. So the first one, and everyone's just going to be like, oh, why am I listening to this? But they're going to get better as we start to go along.
Okay.
It's pretty obvious, but it's just increase your income. And when I say increase your income, I'm not talking about asking for the $5,000 pay rise or the $10,000 pay rise because as I said before, you can only borrow 6 times your income. So if you get a $10,000 pay rise, you can borrow about $60,000 more, and that's not enough to get you another whole property, right? So we're just finding ways either in combination, so we can increase our income through the portfolio and our actual wages. Maybe both partners can increase their wages and find other ways to bring in immediate sources of income to help increase that. Or we look at doing like a side hustle. We don't have to get a second job, but maybe start a contracting role where, whatever you're most skilled at, whatever you're doing, you've applied that at your company for the last 5 years. Can we apply this to somewhere else and bring in a secondary source of income where we can get the 50 or 60 grand extra a year, which then will help leverage us get into the next property.
You know, the thing I like about that one is there's this saying that I heard a while back and it rattles through my head all the time. I'm sure I've mentioned it on the show. If you want to help you, tell them what they want to hear. If you want to help them, tell them what they need to hear. And I really believe that's to tell them what they need to hear because it's not the fun, sexy thing. And I can guarantee you we've lost a few people already that have clicked off. But the people that are still listening right now are the ones that have got such a higher likelihood of actually building a portfolio that has some substance to it. So whilst it's not the fun, sexy answer, it's the crux of it, really.
Well, 100%. And that's the thing that I struggled with is there was all these sexy answers out there that I thought were the solution. And it's not until I actually analyzed and look at the data and go, this is how to do it properly. I was like, okay, that makes sense.
All right. What's number 2?
Number 2 is working with 2 very, very extremely good professionals in the space. And one would be a mortgage broker and an accountant. Both of them need to be very property investment savvy focused and know what they're doing. And what we do with these 2 professionals is number 1, potentially build up a separate type of entity, which could be a company or a trust. Talk to your accountant about that. And a mortgage broker who is comfortable with getting lending in those particular types of entities. Now, it's not the same as it used to be, the Steve Ignite days, where you could buy, $1 million properties in a million different trusts and not disclose them for every bank, because we live in a day of open banking. So all of the bank accounts, everything is really live. Everyone kind of has to see everything. But if you do work with two really good professionals, they may be able to structure things in a certain way that allows you to continue investing, or at least get particular lending within that entity that doesn't necessarily have to involve your personal circumstances or your personal income, but allow you to continue building the portfolio that way.
Okay, and so what kind of questions are you wanting to ask to make sure that you are in front of an accountant or a mortgage broker? Actually, if you don't mind, let's go down the mortgage broker side of things to make sure that this is actually a mortgage broker that can help me grow versus someone that can just write a loan.
Yeah, 100%. So what I've experienced, and I've probably gone through 6 brokers myself, is every time a broker says no, go and talk to 3 more, and go and talk to the ones that are recommended to you. So know someone in the space, in the property investment space, get them to give you a recommendation and just say, hey, I'm stuck with a portfolio. I've talked to my accountant. He said that we can set up a trust structure. Have you had an experience with getting finance within a trust structure? And if they're like, yeah, like we do this with our clients, get them to give you an example, but don't just rely on them. Go and get 2 or 3 other opinions so they can go to different lenders and get different loans. And so you're kind of exposed to everything that's out there.
So no, when you hear it from a broker, it doesn't always actually mean no. It a lot of the time can mean, I don't know.
Exactly. Or I haven't done this before.
Yeah. No, but number 3.
Number 3 is, well, a couple of things. So you could potentially look at getting into a different type of asset rather than just your typical residential loan. And what we typically find here is something called a lease stock loan. Now, usually this comes in the form of a commercial asset where you'd put something down like a 30% deposit rather than a typical 20% deposit.
A much larger deposit.
Correct. And the banks can analyze that and go, okay, it's a little less risky because you got less debt on the asset. But also, typically this comes into commercial form because the tenant pays for the outgoings. And so if you've got a interest rate of 7%, but you've got a yield of 7.5% and the tenant's paying for all the outgoings, then typically your costs should be covered from the asset, and the lender will analyze that loan individually and go, okay, well, it's paying for itself. They should be able to do it. They've got the deposit. We might be okay to just continue to give them the loan, rather than, again, looking at your own personal circumstances and saying, well, they're completely maxed out. They look at this purchase individually.
As long as it stands on its own 2 feet.
As long as it stands on its own 2 feet. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be commercial. Like Todd, you and I were talking a couple of days ago around
unit blocks.
Unit blocks, someone that you had on beforehand, and they were able to get lease stock loans. I think the LVR was 40% or something higher.
Something around there, yeah. Big deposits.
Yeah, big deposits, which means the banks or the lenders are a little bit more comfortable to give you the lending to then continue investing and building out the portfolio that way.
Okay, so if someone's on maybe a bit of a higher income, good savings, then a lease stock loan is something that can really get someone unstuck to continue building the portfolio.
100%. And a really key point on that is don't dive into that first, because if you go and do these lease stock loans first and you get 2 or 3 of them, and then you go, I actually want to buy the family home, or actually want to go and do the residential side, the banks will still analyze all of the debt that you've got there and go, well, you've maxed out, like you can't continue to lend. So you want to max out on the normal typical loans with the big 4 lenders first, build the portfolio that way, and then build it on the other side.
Makes perfect sense. All right, number 4.
Number 4 is the riskiest of all the ones that we've got. And there's a couple of examples that I can go through. But this is doing something where, let's say that you do have the deposit and you can continue investing, but you can't get the lending. The banks said, like, you're maxed out, you've been to a 2nd tier, you've been to a 3rd tier, there's just no way you're getting a loan. And so this is where we look at potentially getting family, friends, people that we know and we trust to invest with.
So you're talking about joint venture agreements, are you?
I am, yeah. I didn't want to blanket under that category, but yeah, essentially it's a JV venture. The reason I say this is quite risky is because you never know what's going to happen. You know, I've seen scenarios where like 2 brothers have invested together, right? And it's all well and good. They've got their savings together. They're excited to get into this investing journey together, but over time, brother number 2 gets a partner. They've been together for a while. They get married. They have kids. And all of a sudden, they want to buy their dream family home. And they go to Mr. Lender, and Mr. Lender says, well, actually, you can't get any lending because you've got this asset with your brother. You can't borrow anymore. And so now brother number 1's in this compromised position of, well, you know, I don't have enough cash to buy out his portion of the asset. I don't want to sell this property, but he has to sell it to get lending to move forward.
So all of a sudden your life is completely controlled financially by the decisions that your partner, JV partner, has made in their life.
100%. You don't have full control of what you do with that asset. And as we know, transacting on property is the biggest wealth killer. So if you're only holding it for 5 years and now you've got to pay all the selling costs and you've paid the stamp duty on the way in and capital gains tax, you know, you could be in a compromised position where you don't get all of that funding coming through. Or
so open that up a sec. Transacting on property is the biggest wealth killer. Well, I'm sure there's other people that have just gone, what does he mean by that?
Yeah, so I commonly say this. It costs about 6% to buy a property. So stamp duty, building and pest, conveyancing, all of those expenses that are outgoing, even if you're not using a buyer's agent. So buyer's agent fee will be on top of that. And then it's 3% to sell a property on the way out. So let's say you make 100K on a property, but you've paid 50 grand worth of purchasing costs and then 30 grand worth of exiting costs, then really you've only got 20 grand worth of profit.
It's not looking very attractive.
And you got to pay capital gains tax on that as well. So even though you might still be a little bit well off, it's not like you've made an extreme wealth out of the property that you would plan to.
Okay, I like that. So, sorry, I've interrupted JVs. Is there anything else on JVs that you wanted to talk about before we get to the final point?
Yeah, and this applies to everyone, right? And another common one that I see is like business partners. They've got this business together, everything's going really well, they've got this surplus cash, what do we do with it? Let's invest in property. And they start to buy these other assets, and then for whatever reason, the business falls over, maybe the partnership falls over or whatever it might be. Now they don't just have this business that they've got together, but they've got these assets that they need to allocate, and they go through lawyers and who's got what, who owns what, do we need to sell it, and everything else like that. Again, you're kind of losing control of what you want to do with that asset.
So what I'm really hearing from you, Jordan, is whilst this is definitely something that can help you continue growing your portfolio, proceed with caution because of so many unknowns. As much as right now it might all be great, even it's not about, but they're a great person, they wouldn't do it. So it's got nothing to do with someone doing something negative towards you. It's got to do with their circumstances change. They could get sick, something could happen, and then that directly affects your portfolio growth.
Yep, you need those funds. You need to give them the funds, and you might not have the funds available to give them.
Yeah, or you might be the person thinking, oh shit, this isn't, yeah.
Correct.
All right, man. Fifth and final point.
Last one is potentially buying in a syndicate. So again, it is deemed as a little bit risky, but not as risky as number 4. And the reason I say it's not as risky is, well, you're still not in control of what you want to do with the asset. But typically when you are building a syndicate, you're working with the same type of investors who are looking for the same type of deal. Generally, they're in the same position where they're potentially maxed out in their personal name, and they're looking to continue build their portfolio. So it's kind of like a bit of a brains trust coming together, and you can invest together and make informed decisions, do due diligence around the actual asset, and buy something together with a group of people. But again, at the end of the day, you don't have full control of that asset. So if you did want to sell, or if one of the parties wanted to sell, it's not as easy and flexible as just going, hey, Mr. Agent, can we put this on the market?
Plus, there's no leverage. To me, that's one of the biggest attractions of property. And it's like, you want to buy 200 grand, 500 grand in your syndicate. You need 200 grand, 500 grand. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. 100%. Leverage is the biggest wealth builder of property, let's put it that way. And if you're buying in a syndicate, then obviously you don't have that, but it's just one of those things that allows you to continue investing if you've got the cash.
There are some pretty amazing returns. I know someone that was actually about to actually, I don't know if I can say this, so I'll speak in generalities, about to buy a part of a very large shopping mall. And it was something that I was like, wow, when they started explaining it, sounded like it was completely under market value, and it was like a 10% net yield or something.
Wow.
It was huge.
That's massive.
Yeah, I'll talk to you about it after. But it was just like, that's insane. So they were kind of looking at it going, yeah, it can't be leveraged, but 10% net yield just on my money anyway, I'm pretty happy with that.
I'm not going to say no to that.
Yeah, so again, okay, so you're looking into it basically. Number 1, increase your income. Number 2, talk to a really good broker that understands how to actually build a portfolio, and make sure you've got an accountant in your corner as well. Lease stock loans, if you're running a bit short, but you are going to have a larger deposit. JVs, approach with caution. They can work, but just don't go into it blind. And finally, we're talking about buying into a syndicate. Anything else you want to wrap things up with today, Jordan?
No, that's it for me, mate.
Awesome. Jordan De Jong from Gameplans, thank you so much for jumping on the show.
No worries. Thanks for having me.